One thing we humans are really good at is communicating. We bond with each other through verbal interaction. We talk to console and encourage each other, or to pass along valuable information. We create technologies that radically expand our capacity to connect with each other through mass media and social media. No one has to encourage us to talk. We do it instinctively, and we're always looking for new ways to communicate. So why do human beings place such a high priority on the ability to communicate with each other? And why do we have an insatiable appetite for new and better communications technologies? Hi, my name is James Lull. I'm a professor of communication studies at San Jose State University. It's located in the heart of Silicon Valley here in California. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to a new way of thinking about communication and evolution. Let's get started with a really powerful observation. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. That astute insight was made by a biologist nearly 50 years ago. Now let's expand on his idea. Nothing in evolution makes sense except in the light of communication. Let's think that through again. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And nothing in evolution makes sense except in the light of communication. Communication is the motor of evolution. That fact represents the essence of the evolutionary communication perspective. Evolutionary communication is a way of looking at communication from the standpoint of evolutionary theory, and a way of thinking about evolution by highlighting the role of communication in evolutionary processes. In this video, I will explain why communication drives biological and cultural evolution, including the development of communications technologies. Since the onset of biological time, nearly 4 billion years ago, the drive that compels evolution is the innate ability of all forms of organic life to communicate. So to tell the story of human communication, we have to go back to the very first forms of organic life on our planet, the single cell. Single cells emerged from chemicals that gushed from hydrothermal vents located deep on the ocean floor. Those first organisms were bacteria cells. A global network of biological life exists throughout the natural world today, formed at its lowest organic level by single cells. The flow of information that takes place inside all organisms and travels from the organism to the environment and back represent nature's most fundamental communication processes. Look at what cells do. To interact with their environments and communicate internally, cells constantly receive and send electrically charged chemical signals. Cells contain proteins that act as communications media. Receptor proteins pick up signals given off by the physical surroundings, including signals emitted by other cells. The receptor proteins then transmit signals through the cell's integral proteins embedded in the membrane. The signals form pathways and bump into each other where they intersect and create crosstalk. In order to survive, cells have to increase the size of their population. Scientists learned that as cells absorb information from their environments, they recognize themselves as identical to or different from the other cells around them. When individual cells of the same species sense they outnumber the cells of species surrounding them, they reproduce, form clusters, and act more aggressively. At the optimal point, cells on the edges of the cluster stop reproducing in order to assure the survivability of the group. By engaging in collective behavior, cells assure the survivability of the group, but also of each individual cell. That's why organisms of all kinds form groups. Evolution cannot be reduced to the idea that each individual organism, no matter how big or small, competes with every other organism for competitive advantage. Yes, individuals compete to live, but ultimately they survive by cooperating, and they communicate to make that happen. So here's a key idea, a central idea. in the study of evolutionary communication that applies to organisms that range from simple cells to complex human beings. Communication builds communities, and communities are good for the individuals that make them up. Western languages reveal how closely the concepts community and communication are. Both words share the same root in Latin. Communis means common. The first syllable com signifies with or together. The second syllable munis means to strengthen, fortify, or defend. Now let's add another dimension. Communitas in Latin implies fellowship. So in English, community means to be strongly and emotionally connected with others like you, and that you are willing to defend the group. The first part of the English word communicate has the same linguistic root as community, communis, which means common or shared. So to communicate means to share within a community. Sharing forms the foundation of all complex societies. We communicate socially by signaling each other with information we can use, and by exchanging messages in ways that build community, like these folks are doing. We are exploring why humans and all other living organisms communicate in the first place. The motives begin with something pretty basic: survival. Early in our history, simple gestures and crude vocalizations allowed individuals to cooperate in order to sustain and protect themselves. Communicating to cooperate is innate. Throughout the world today, cooperative child rearing and diverse work groups are just a couple examples that reveal the importance of cooperative behavior facilitated by communication. The entire natural world depends on the ability to communicate in order to cooperate. Connected at the root, trees pump nutrients to the roots of other wounded, diseased, or decapitated trees in order to maintain thick growth so they won't all die from the sun and wind. During big storms, treetops whack each other in ways that slow down the whip-like motion, keeping individual trees from falling over. Trees repair injuries by sending sealing agents to cover the wounds. Botanical superenvironments are made up of all kinds of plants. To guide their cycle of growth, plants communicate to respond to changing conditions of light, water, and temperature. Some of a plant's cells multiply and grow in a direction that bends the organism toward light. Cells in the roots reach for water and nourishment in the soil. Long threads of fungi act as communications channels by relaying chemical compounds and electrical signals sent by the plants to the root systems of other plants. That's how they warn each other of threats posed by toxic chemicals or diseased neighboring plants. Many plants reproduce by releasing scents into the air or by producing brightly colored flowers that attract bees and other pollinators. And plants have memory. They store information and learn from experience. Lower life animals communicate to cooperate too. The classic example is the honeybee dance. Honeybees spend their entire life in search of food. When they find nectar or pollen, they bring it back to their hives where they convert the nectar into honey by creating a honeycomb. The honeycomb serves as a food source that gets the bees through the winter. But here's the really interesting part. When a honeybee returns to the hive after locating a food source, the bee excitedly signals other members of the hive by performing a movement scientists call the waggle dance. The waggle refers to the movement of the bee's abdomen, which can be as rapid as 15 distinct movements per second. Fast when a food source is close, slow when a long flight will be required. The figure-8 pattern of the honeybee dance points toward the location of the food source outside the hive. The movement of the dance also emits the specific odor of the pollen, another piece of information the bees use to make successful trips. The colony responds by further transmitting the information. Big animals communicate to cooperate too, of course. For example, lions take up wing and center positions on the chase to bring down zebras or buffalo. Orca whales coordinate attacks on seals and cooperate to stun and eat fish. Wolves maintain eye contact with each other when chasing elk to pursue the vulnerable ones. Chimpanzees coordinate their behavior to hunt and defend their territory collectively. But as a social species, chimpanzees really need to do more than that in order to develop a sense of trust overall. They communicate to make that happen. They form friendship alliances, they share snacks, and they groom each other. We'll talk more about that later. As we know, nature also pits predators against prey. To avoid being eaten by predators, animals use communication strategies. Some of these strategies evolved naturally over time by natural selection. For example, the bulging eye spots on many butterfly species, or the red-eyed tree frog. The eye spots signal dominance or danger. The heavy armor of armadillos and turtles discourages attacks. Many reptiles, including geckos, and some mammals like white hares or rabbits, avoid predators because their coloring hides them in their natural environments. Animals communicate by their behavior too. Like this grizzly bear defending his territory, as pictured on a billboard in northern Montana. When people visit public parks, like this one, or just venture into the wilderness, they're warned to watch out for large carnivores like mountain lions or bears. By comparison, humans are weak and slow. We have to win a contest of wills by demonstrating and communicating confidence and dominance. Check out this clever communication strategy in the delta region of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers between India and Bangladesh. This is where hundreds of people have been killed by man-eating tigers as they navigate from one location to another. Travelers now wear masks with bulging eyes on the backs of their heads. No matter what direction they face, the travelers signal awareness and ferocity that discourages the big cats from attacking the group. Humans evolved to become the dominant animal species on our planet, not because of our size or physical ability, but because of our advanced cognitive development and unparalleled communication skill. Yes, that makes us special, but let's be clear about our status. The lineage of our species has been demonstrated with empirical evidence. We did not suddenly appear as fully formed human beings. And we did not evolve from apes. We are apes. Homo sapiens descend from a line of ancestral primates that emerged about 20 million years ago. We broke off from the last species of the other ape lineages, chimpanzees, about 6 million years ago. That's why we share so much DNA with chimpanzees. Our evolutionary pathway then leads from our pre-human ancestors through our immediate human predecessors, Homo habilis and Homo erectus. We are answering the question, why do we communicate? We briefly discussed the first motivation, sheer survival. The second motivation is to reproduce. Sexual reproduction is the way we send our genes forward to the next generation. Consciously or unconsciously, sexual reproduction is a powerful motivation to communicate. Males throughout the animal kingdom aggressively seek out mates for sex. In most cases, female animals control sexual reproduction because they choose their mates. For a male to find a sexual partner, he has to be able to demonstrate superior fitness, a robust and healthy physical condition, and behavioral qualities that could lead to viable offspring. When choosing a mate, the female of the species cannot inspect the genetic profiles of the males that are attempting to win her favor. Instead, she will attempt to mate with those males that can most persuasively demonstrate behavioral qualities and physical characteristics that promise to produce excellent offspring. So it is not the actual fitness that is selected by the female. She responds to how well the appearance of fitness is communicated by the male. Creativity and extravagance are rewarded. Poor communicators reproduce less. Probably the most obvious and extravagant example of male sexual signaling in the animal world is the display of feathers exhibited by the male peacock. Male frigate seabirds also make quite a display to show off their robust health and good looks. Male crocodiles splash and roar while emitting an odor that attracts females. Crabs, crickets, spiders, grasshoppers, and countless other species display coloration, ornamentation, and sound that evolved to attract females. Males of our own species use lots of similar communication strategies to win female attention. Besides their bodies, men use other media, threatening dogs, fast or expensive cars, military service and guns, piercings, displays of animals killed hunting, sports, money, rap and metal music, sexting, and dating websites. Earlier, we explained the importance of cooperation and community building. In the animal kingdom, female sexual selection also reflects the degree of cooperation that is communicated by the male. Females can't produce as many offspring as males can. For that reason, females have more to lose if some of their offspring die, because then her genes, the females, won't go forward to the next generation. And for that reason, family man social skills displayed by the males can win sexual access. For many species, including these Magellanic penguins in Patagonia, male home building is rewarded sexually. After a male has prepared a proper nest, he announces it to potential mates. Sharing domestic responsibility is a sign that can lead to reproductive success for males of our species too. Female sexual selection remains an informed guess, resulting from communicated clues that were sent by the male. When the male can effectively demonstrate and communicate to the female desirable qualities, and when the female can choose wisely, well, that's the best solution for both. Sexual selection, of course, does not work the same way for humans. While male humans may find ways to advertise and exaggerate their qualities, females are on display just as much, probably even more so than males are. The type of display depends upon the culture. Men assert more influence over sexual selection in ways that range from objectification of the female body in modern Western societies to arranged marriages in more traditional cultures. Research shows that female reproductive value centers mainly on physical features, emphasizing youth and good health, to behavioral features such as lively movement, kindness, and cheerfulness. We're describing the primary motivations that underlie human communication behavior. All living things communicate to survive and reproduce. A third motivating force of evolutionary communication plays a role too. The need to express ourselves cannot be explained by natural or sexual selection alone. Our physical bodies, especially our speech organs, facial muscles, overall dexterity, plus our artistic talent and technical abilities, allow humans to express the widest range of emotion in the animal kingdom. Artful expression brings so much joy, pleasure, beauty, and wonder in and of itself that we should not think of expression solely as an evolutionary adaptation or byproduct. Expression can be its own motivation. Formal recognition of freedom of expression originated more than 3 centuries ago during the Enlightenment in Europe, and has contributed to the world's civilizing process since then. Expression is so basic to our common humanity that it is considered to be a right in modern societies, as prescribed in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Article 19 of the Declaration says that expressive rights are one of the basic human rights that everyone has guaranteed by the Declaration of Human Rights. The document speaks of the right of every one of us to seek, create, express, and receive ideas through communication channels that range from basic movements and vocalizations of the human body in local contexts to manipulations of high technology in global communications. The United Nations considers access to the Internet to be a human right. The power of human expression explodes from the creative ways that we use the communication resources that are available to us. Being creative in how we express ourselves is natural for us, much like communication itself. The origins of creative human expression predate the birth of any of the various art forms we might recognize around us today. The first stone tools invented by our hominin ancestors were hand axes. Hand axes were shaped into elongated forms that could be gripped and manipulated for cutting and chopping meat and plants. But over long expanses of time, hand axes became more than useful tools. Differences in the quality of workmanship that went into making the axes became evident. Some were more aesthetically pleasing than others. The hand axe became an art form and communications medium that represented the personal qualities of the tool maker, who was also becoming an artist. A beautifully crafted hand axe showed the qualities of hard work, planning ability, fine motor control, creativity, artistic flair, and persistence. Males who could produce beautiful hand axes became good candidates for sexual selection. The product of their work gratified the need for survival, reproduction, and pure expression. Because tools are so crucial to us as individuals and groups, the skills needed to be communicated from one generation to the next must have been in place way back among our early ancestors. And in the process, gestures and crude vocalizations became part of the training of early spoken language. The Mission District in San Francisco has many murals like this one that tell something of the story of the Latino experience in California. Murals represent a later stage of symbolic communication that has its roots that go way back to our earliest ancestors. Early humans scarred, punctured, stretched, and painted their skin as a form of symbolic expression. A huge advance in evolutionary communication, though, took place when human beings began to paint surfaces other than their skin. The first documented attempts at external symbolic expression were obscure markings on cave walls in South Africa that date back as far as 100,000 years. Mineral pigment was mixed with water to create a substance that could be applied to the walls. Anthropologists have found other forms of early human expression throughout Africa and in what is now the Middle East. Perforated, polished, and colored shells were strung together as ornamental beads for necklaces and bracelets. Our ancestors used natural materials like hollow sticks, animal and bird bones, and stones to make musical instruments. Humans have enjoyed the pleasure of expression for a long time. Another big leap forward in evolutionary communication was the birth of representational art. Now, symbolic forms that can clearly be recognized for what they are is what we call representational art. Some of the most impressive and well-preserved evidence of early representational art was made by some of our ancestors after they reached Europe between 50 and 75,000 years ago. The artwork appears on cave walls in France, Spain, Germany, and Italy. Figurative art like this has been found in Indonesia too. Our ancestors also made figurines of stone and bone, ivory sculptures, clay statuettes, and decorative clothing. As we evolved culturally, we invented new ways to communicate, and we imagined new receivers for our messages. Our ancestors created forms of symbolic expression that were external to the body, could be preserved, and influence people long after they were created. As communications resources further evolved, especially in recent history, resources for human expression grew tremendously in complexity. From natural materials like pigments and acoustic musical instruments, to consumer-friendly visual media and sophisticated audio equipment. Computer-based consumer electronics have taken evolutionary communication to another level completely for people with the means to acquire these devices. Smartphones, tablets, laptops, and other digital devices empower users to be creative producers and senders, as well as receivers of messages. Taking photos or making videos and posting them instantly on social media from almost anywhere dramatically change the limits that time and space impose on human creativity, communication, and influence. Being able to create or manipulate images and sounds using consumer electronics, digital media, empowers individuals to achieve a goal. That goal might be to expose friends to a photo, to some music that you know, or an amateur work of art, or to a political or lifestyle statement. All of that is innocent enough, but throughout history, individuals haven't been the only ones that benefit by managing the technological and symbolic landscape. Symbolic power refers to the use of symbolic forms to influence or persuade. Symbolic power is exercised in the domains of ideology, language, art, and the culture of everyday life. All well-financed social institutions use the force of communication to create and extend their influence. The symbolic power of religion rests on highly recognizable logos, massive architectural forms that dominate population centers, rituals that demand conformity and submission. Sacred books narrate the mythologies that have been deployed for centuries by religious institutions to spread their beliefs and build their communities. Multinational corporations also depend on the persuasive impact of symbolic forms, including impressive architecture that sends a clear message of economic dominance. Nation-states create flags, anthems, and folklore to win the loyalty of citizens. Iconic buildings and media exposure for political leaders represent national interests. Because it benefits multiple social power brokers, symbolic forms often share space that represents and reinforces their mutual interests. The ability to use symbolic power is not limited to institutions that already have influence. Sometimes symbolic power becomes the force that brings about meaningful social change. The original channels of human communication are both auditory and visual. Our distant ancestors first used gestures to point to a predator, a food source, or a safe place to rest. Gesturing helped develop the social interdependencies that early humans needed to survive. We still gesture, even when we can't be seen, like when we're talking on a telephone. Gestures and vocalized sounds set the stage for the development of much more complex forms of human speech, as we know. All mammals are capable of making sounds, but our species alone has the physical characteristics needed to create differentiated sounds that allow for a wide range of vocalized messages. Mimicking animals and making spontaneous emotional outbursts represent some of the early aspects of vocalized speech. But humming represents the melodic qualities of human speech. Our ancestral mothers, to comfort their babies, may have been making humming sounds that represent the lullabies that we recognize today. Developing a sense of community begins with individual friendships that are typically reciprocal in nature. Our unique communication skills give us many ways to establish and, very important, to maintain those relationships. The need for social, intimate contact drives many other animals' behavior too. To survive, many animals create and nurture productive relationships by physically grooming each other. Horses, big cats, birds, monkeys, and especially apes all groom each other. Being willfully touched releases pleasurable endorphins in the brain. Stroking, rubbing, scratching, massaging, tickling, and petting all produce a chemical effect within and across species. Talking to someone in a friendly way creates a feeling that resembles touch. Casual conversation functions as vocal grooming. We make it a point to reach out, to stay in touch, or be in contact with our friends by means of in-person get-togethers, text messages, and phone calls. Casual conversation is so essential to our well-being that it has been appropriated widely by the mass media as a popular genre, the talk show. And of course, the success of social media depends entirely on our need to converse. As we evolved as a species, our brains grew larger and our cognition became more complex. The demands of increasingly intricate social organization, however, required that we are able to express more complicated thoughts. Complex spoken language was the solution, but a diverse set of biological adaptations had to be in place before spoken language could emerge. They include bipedalism, a large and complex brain, the larynx, and other associated speech organs. They all had to be in place before a true language could be spoken. Effective social interaction increases the cooperative potential of the group, a motive that has survived to this very day in all parts of life. The adaptations that enable language to emerge have been in place for so long now that the ability to speak a language became hardwired into our DNA. Our ancestors were using some form of language long before they left Africa. The subsequent growth and spread of language depended on the conditions in the social, cultural, and physical environments where our ancestral tribes relocated. Here you see the migratory patterns that our anatomically modern Homo sapiens ancestors took inside and outside Africa over the past 200,000 years. It's impossible to know precisely when our ancestors first began to speak, but we have a very good idea about when they began to write. We also know why they invented writing. Even after many of them left Africa, our ancestors survived for tens of thousands of years as hunters and gatherers. They followed the migrations of wild animals as their main source of food. But by thinking innovatively, people living in Mesopotamia, the area that now corresponds mainly with Iraq and Syria, discovered they could survive better by systematically growing native plants like wheat, domesticating animals, including goats and sheep, and settling down in one location. The agricultural revolution began about 12,000 years ago in what is now the Middle East, and it led to a crucial stage in evolutionary communication when writing first appeared about 5,000 years ago. Writing solved practical problems that the limitations of oral communication or spoken language could not overcome. Before writing, the only way to store information and keep track of things was to use memorization and spoken language. But memorization no longer worked for life in the complex cities and civilizations that were being created. Constraints on cognition played a role. Our brains have limited capacity to remember things, and of course, we are prone to making mistakes. With so much information being generated, a more precise and efficient data processing system was needed. The system that was invented to respond to these demands was written language. The original innovation that led to the invention of writing and mathematics was sculpting symbolic commodity tokens out of wet clay. Each token represented an item that was owned or traded by an individual. The tokens were referential. They stood for something else. So, for instance, a small cone stood for a small bin of grain. A larger sphere represented a large bin of grain. Taken together, the tokens form the first scripted communications code and represent the early stages of written language and mathematics. Mathematical notations created by Mesopotamian cultures set the stage for advanced thinking in science, technology, and engineering. Clear and lasting pictographic impressions were later carved into soft clay tablets using a reed or bone stylus, creating the first form of written communications technology. Modern written language developed from cuneiform script like this. Even more elaborate pictographs were developed into hieroglyphics in nearby Egypt. We still use universal pictographs to communicate essential information. Documenting facts and thoughts, making them durable and accessible, was a major breakthrough in both culture and communication. People could now be recognized for what they had written and held accountable for it. Written language and mathematics paved the way for modern civilizations to evolve. Writing and math drove an endless chain of advanced tools and technologies that lies at the heart of evolutionary communication. But innovations in communication are always influenced by the social structure in place at the time. From the beginning, writing and decisions about who can become literate were used by the religious, economic, and cultural elites of the emerging city-states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the surrounding region. Today, 1/5 of the entire global population, 2/3 of whom are women, still cannot read or write. Organic evolution and technological evolution unfold in similar ways. New biological species emerge over time in changing environments. Stagnating species recede or disappear. Technological innovation creates new forms, while it destroys outmoded industries and products. The changes can happen fast, especially now. Developments in personal communications technology come particularly fast. Typewritten letters replaced handwritten correspondence. Email replaced standard delivery mail. Messaging and posting with emojis and photos replaced email. Plant and animal species become more complex and diverse as they compete for space and resources in constantly changing environments. Technology drives the evolution of its own complexity and diversity in environments where innovation is encouraged. Well, here we are at the headquarters for Google, which is in Mountain View, California, here in the Silicon Valley. It's a perfect setting to talk about the relationship between organisms, biological organisms, and technology. When a biological organism reproduces, it transmits its genes to its offspring. On the other hand, new technologies are made from materials that already exist in the physical world and from component technologies that were previously assembled. For example, the inventors of AM radio combined electromagnetic waves that can be shaped to transmit audio signals with the various mechanical components that would make up the physical electronic device. The force that compels the development of technology more than anything else is speed, the constant pressure to move information around faster and faster. From spoken language to encrypted software, and from scratches on parchment to global interactions facilitated by communications satellites, sapiens are driven to connect as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We often need to get information fast, especially in threatening situations. Nature has no conscious intention to improve. Organic evolution does not necessarily produce superior or even viable solutions. Dead ends take place in the technological evolution, the development of technology too. Think of Google Glass, hoverboards, 3D television, or spray-on hair, for example. But the evolution of some essential technological forms, especially when they promise to satisfy our innate need to communicate, is inevitable. Could the smartphone not have been invented? With the steady progression of functionality in electronic media and computer technology, could satellite communications and streaming audio and video not have been invented? Technological speed and efficiency help us survive, reproduce, and express ourselves. But another factor is becoming more and more important these days, and that is the content of what we communicate. I'm talking about information. Factually credible information is a life-sustaining resource. Vital information flows through each atom, molecule, and cell of every plant and animal on Earth. The transfer of information from one organism to another represents nature's most basic social communication process. Humans naturally share information. It's in our genes to do so. And we instinctively want to reduce uncertainty. We depend on the accuracy and integrity of information to make rational decisions. But as digital technology has dramatically increased the spread of information that circulates everywhere around us, it has also accelerated the spread of false information, uncredible information. The meaning of truth. Information supported by facts that accurately represent empirical reality shouldn't waver in a secular society. But for some people, truth means instead what feels true, what feels right emotionally, regardless of the facts. Fear is the most commonly expressed negative human emotion. Fear is a psychological and biological response to real and imagined threats. Fear helps keep us alive. Our body warns us of possible danger by creating emotional and chemical reactions induced by stress, especially when we feel helpless. Many fears developed as instinctual reactions to the dangers that our ancestors encountered in nature: snakes, spiders, germs, and lightning storms among them. We have good reason to fear many things, but fear can distort perception and destroy communities. Fear is being exploited by some media commentators and politicians to win ratings in elections. Disregarding or discrediting the advice of esteemed scientists and other legitimate authorities, together with an unwarranted loss of trust in institutions, including credible news media and science, creates confusion and anxiety. The crisis of information represents an evolutionary paradox. Acting rationally on the basis of reliable information has been crucial to human evolution. Logic and reason are not likely to disappear, but fear isn't going to go away either. Complex biological systems like the human body emerge through the gradual accumulation of random genetic mutations that occur over thousands of generations. Besides shared DNA, what all living organisms have in common is the ability to communicate. Like the bacteria cells that got this whole thing called life started by sending and receiving signals internally and externally. And for social species like dolphins and humans, effective communication makes it possible to coordinate activity and form communities. Because we humans have the ability to think rationally, exchange ideas, clarify, negotiate, and compromise through language and other forms of communication, enormous human populations are able to live relatively peacefully in very close proximity. In this video, and thank you by the way for watching, we've explored some of the main themes that make up evolutionary communication. We've looked briefly at why we communicate and how we communicate. There's a lot more ground to cover. We've just scratched the surface about what we communicate. In the upcoming editions of the Evolutionary Communication channel, we will explore how evolutionary communication shapes culture, ideology, religion, morality, identity, and more about community. Developing a more inclusive sense of community is the primary challenge that faces our species in our evolutionary history. The word evolution can be found everywhere in public life. But evolution as a framework for explaining human behavior, well, that's been late to develop in the social sciences, especially in communication science. All the material presented on this channel is drawn from research presented in my latest textbook, Evolutionary Communication and Introduction, published by Routledge, USA. The book does not assume that the reader has any specialized knowledge about evolutionary theory. You can find paperback and electronic copies of the book on Amazon or get it directly from the publisher. And you can read essays I've written about evolution and many other related topics on my website, jameslull.com. Well, if you like this presentation, please give it a thumbs up, make a comment, subscribe to the channel, and please tell your friends, your colleagues, your students, your teachers about the Evolutionary Communication channel on YouTube. My name is James Lull. I thank you very much for your interest in evolutionary communication. We'll see you again.